So, how does it happen? How do nations run by smart, totally rational people find themselves right on the edge of a truly devastating war? Today, we're going to peel back the layers of the headlines and look at the psychology at play between Iran, Israel, and the United States. We're treating this whole geopolitical crisis like a big, complex human puzzle. Let's get into it.
Just picture this for a second. The year is 2026. An operation called Epic Fury kicks off, and in just 12 hours, nearly 900 airstrikes slam into targets all across Iran. And in return, a massive storm of missiles and drones is unleashed on the entire region. Now, this isn't some sci-fi movie plot. It's a very real scenario based on current tensions, and it just begs the most important question of all.
Right. How did we get here? How did leaders, who you've got to assume are acting in their country's best interest, end up choosing a path that leads to, well, that? This isn't just about land or oil. To really get it, we have to look past the simple geopolitics and dive into the psychology of it all, where things like fear and memory and perception, well, they're the ones really driving the conflict.
So, to understand how these nations took that last fateful step towards war, we first have to understand what brought them to the cliff edge to begin with. The story didn't just start yesterday. It's a conflict that's been built on a foundation of really deep historical grievances that have been simmering for decades.
Yeah, this whole history is just steeped in mutual trauma and a sense of betrayal. And these aren't just little footnotes in a history book. They are living, breathing memories that have shaped national identities and fueled this profound, almost unbreakable sense of mistrust on all sides.
This timeline really shows the key moments that have defined everything. For Iran, you have to remember 1953, a CIA-backed coup takes down their democratically elected leader. That is a foundational trauma. For the U.S., the '79 hostage crisis became this huge symbol of radicalism. And then, much more recently in 2020, the assassination of General Soleimani. The U.S. saw it as taking a terrorist off the board. Iran saw it as a straight-up act of war. Each event just adds another layer of scar tissue.
And this right here, this is the crucial point. This history isn't just the backdrop to the current situation, it is the situation. It's like a powerful psychological lens. Every single action, every statement from the other side is filtered through this lens of past wrongs, which makes seeing things neutrally, well, pretty much impossible.
Okay, so with all that history in our back pocket, let's get to the real core of this. The specific psychological traps that can turn all that tension into actual open warfare. These are the cognitive traps that leaders, and even entire populations, can just fall right into.
So the biggest concept we need to get our heads around is something called mirror image perception. And honestly, it's one of the most dangerous traps in international politics. Basically, both sides look in the mirror and see a victim who's just acting in self-defense. Then they look out at their opponent and they see a malicious, evil aggressor. They're convinced the other side is just fundamentally hostile.
And it becomes so clear when you put the two perspectives right next to each other. Iran sees itself as the victim of a U.S. empire that's always trying to topple its government, and sees sanctions as an unfair punishment of its people. At the same time, the U.S. and Israel see themselves as the victims, threatened by a country with nuclear ambitions that's sponsoring terror groups all over the place. Each side 100% believes their story is the truth. They aren't just disagreeing, they are living in two completely different but perfectly mirrored realities.
So, what keeps this crazy mirror world from just shattering? Well, three really powerful psychological forces. First up, confirmation bias. You go looking for information that proves your enemy is evil, and you completely ignore anything that suggests otherwise. A peace offering? Nah, that's just a trick. Second, zero-sum thinking. This is the idea that any win for them is automatically a loss for you. There's no middle ground, no win-win. And finally, group loyalty. Leaders use all this fiery nationalist language to get everyone on their side, which makes any kind of compromise look like betrayal and basically kills any chance for real diplomacy.
And collective memory, man, it plays a huge part in all this. This quote is just incredibly powerful. For Israel, the trauma of the Holocaust isn't just history, it's an active, working, cognitive setting. The phrase never again is not just a slogan for memorials, it's a deep-seated psychological impulse that makes preemptive strikes seem not just like an option, but a moral duty to stop another existential threat. It just goes to show how deeply history is wired into a nation's brain.
Now let's talk about the words themselves. Because the language you use in a conflict doesn't just describe what's happening, it actually creates the reality of it. The words we pick can build walls or they can build bridges, and in this case, they've built some serious fortresses. Take a term like the regime. When Western leaders talk about the Iranian government, they don't say the government, they say the regime. That's a deliberate choice. It completely strips away its legitimacy. It implies it doesn't represent its own people. It basically dehumanizes the leadership, turning them into this abstract thing that's way easier to fight. And it's the same thing with the word terrorists. When one side labels the other's allies as terrorists, it's doing something really powerful psychologically. It boils down complex political goals into just pure, simple evil. You don't have to try and understand their point of view anymore. And, most importantly, it gives you the moral green light to use overwhelming force against them.
And finally, the aggressors. This label, this is the glue that holds that whole mirror image perception together. By constantly painting your opponent as the only aggressor, you get to reinforce the idea that all of your own actions, no matter how violent they get, are purely defensive. You're not starting a war, you're just responding to one.
So you see, the main takeaway is that this is not just political spin. This kind of language actually builds a reality where going to war seems like the only logical and even moral choice. When your enemy is an illegitimate, evil, aggressive monster, well, talking starts to look like weakness, and compromise feels like a total moral failure.
So yeah, it's a pretty bleak picture. But is this whole downward spiral just inevitable? Well, according to conflict psychology, maybe not. There are ways to break this vicious circle of fear and hostility, but I gotta tell you, they are incredibly hard to pull off. So there are a few potential paths forward. First, these things called problem-solving workshops. They are not formal negotiations, more like secret off-the-record meetings where people can start to understand the other side's fears and why they do what they do. The goal isn't a treaty, it's just to start seeing the other side as human. Second, leaders have to actively reframe the public story. And third, you need neutral mediators who can build back some of that trust that's been totally destroyed.
Ultimately, what all this really boils down to is a massive shift in mindset. It's about moving away from that zero-sum game of victory over the enemy and towards the much more difficult but lasting goal of shared security. It's finally realizing that you can never truly be safe as long as your enemy feels like their very existence is threatened, because their insecurity is always, eventually, going to become your problem.
And that leaves us right here, with this one final really big question. We've seen how these powerful psychological forces, fear, trauma, these distorted perceptions can literally pave the road to war. But if those very human things are the cause, could their opposites, understanding, empathy, and just having the courage to try and see the world through your enemy's eyes, could that be the path to peace? The answer to that, well, it might just decide the fate of millions.